videos in 90% of them. So
it's probably like the same view each time, just kind of like creeping in from the northwest.
there I am. All right.
All right, we're good to go? Okay. All right. Make sure there's nobody out here. All right. All right, let's go ahead and try this. Let's see how this goes. So, the name of this is the digital genome. So we're going to see how this goes. This is mostly new stuff. I'll start off by saying this is probably going to be an unconventional presentation. Unlike Todd and Chris and Mark, I have no good ideas for you. I have no recommendations. There are no best practices here, save for best practices that are no longer best practices. So, having set the expectations really low, I think we can go ahead and get started. I think we'll probably walk away with more questions than answers. And it's pretty doughy, so there's a lot of wet paint in here. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how this goes. Tell you a little bit about myself. A few of you probably already know who I am. I have a BFA in visual communication design. You wouldn't know it by looking at my slides, so that's because I was in a hurry. I have my MS in Information Architecture and Knowledge Management, MBA from Weatherhead. I'm on the full-time UXC faculty over at the library. Work with multiple design firms, corporations, doing a lot of workshops to, I think most recently, I guess last year, the Ohio Academic Library Association, I probably got that a little wrong, was in Bucharest last week doing a workshop. Was recently quoted in a New York Times sponsored post discussing how UX can make airline travel a little bit better. I'm also the chairperson for UX Akron, local group here, and I would not be doing my job if I didn't talk about UX Akron for just a minute. We have two upcoming events. The first is the Psychology of UX, which is on March 30th, featuring Elena Phillips, who's right here. I think it'll be a really interesting talk discussing the obvious overlaps of psychology and UX. And on April 14th, we're actually going to be having a workshop with Chris McWigan. Chris actually spoke to UX Akron community, I think in September. It went really well. It was really well received. And we decided to have her come back in the spring to do a career workshop. So looking forward to that. Also just wanted to share this with you. This is big news if you follow UX Akron at all. We are now officially a tax-exempt organization. So yeah, I just got the letter yesterday. So that's a really big deal for us. And also want to share with you IA Summit. It's coming up on March 21st through the 25th. It's in Chicago. Nice, easy driving distance. Kent State is a sponsor, so I will be there. It'll be interesting to see if anybody else is there. It'd be great to catch up in the Windy City. So let's see. This is good. Like I said, this is going to be a weird talk. And one of the nice things about working in a library is that I have access to a lot of books. And so I did a lot of research for this talk. And one of the most interesting books I found was this one. And it's from 1999. This is the Directory of Websites. And I think that this is going to be actually very relevant to what I'm going to talk about. So this is the Directory of Websites. If you want to know what websites to go to, this is the book that you can get. Now, the really interesting thing is Yahoo is not in here. Google is not in here. Alta Vista is not in here. It's kind of funny. It's like the author said, you know, if only there were a place where I could find these websites. God, I hope they never. We'll call it like a question motor or something like that, you know. But this was really fun. But what's really interesting about this, I think, and really how it ties into the talk is, I mean, who thinks any of the websites in this book from 99 are as they were in 99, right? So this book, you know, from 1999, that is stamped as this book does not circulate, it's effectively useless. It's pretty much worthless, right? And somehow I was able to sneak it out of the library. This is a quote I've used in a couple of other presentations. I think it's an interesting quote, and I think it's one that keeps, I really kind of keep coming to as I consider the web, mobile apps, technology, etc. And I think that it really speaks to the overwhelming and quickening change that we see in society because of technology, access to information, these sorts of things. And now, while this quote could have been made at any time, it was actually made 90 years ago by a well-known typographer named Jan Schickel. As I've noted, my background was in design, so I took a lot of art history classes, and what Schickel was really responding to was the rapid availability to print media, print design tools, as well as increasing rates of literacy. And so when we think about information and access to information, the web, and we really think about how information is shared in societies. And really the history of civilization is the history of how we've created information, how we've shared information, and how that information has ultimately changed societies. Jason Richardson isn't here today, but this is actually a concept that I've been thinking about for around 8 or 9 years, and just finally had the time to put it together in some format. And Jason and I met one day after finishing our graduate studies and said, you know, there's got to be a way that we can critique and appraise information in both digital and print form to understand what its impact is, what its relevance is to society. He said there's probably 3 different dimensions for describing evolution. Technology, which really is fundamental and a big enabler to the proliferation of information. And then we have content, what is being communicated or transmitted. And then design or style, which is something that I'm particularly interested in. What conventions are we applying to information that we are producing? What do we know is good, right? And an example here is print media, right? So this is a print of the 95 Theses. Anybody who's familiar with the Reformation in the Western world knows what this is. Now, the story that we are told is that a Catholic monk in Germany hammered the 95 Theses, his protest against the church, on the church doors in Wittenberg, Germany. And that's true. But what is more true and what is more important, and why this is an important document to talk about, is the fact that this is an example of information going viral. It's 501 years old, but the real power of this is not just the arguments. Okay? The power of this is that within years, hundreds of thousands of copies of this were printed and distributed throughout Germany and Europe, and ultimately led to political upheaval, war, and a loosening of the power of the Roman Church in Germany. So it was not just a religious document, it was also a nationalist document. Now, the important thing to remember here is Martin Luther was not the first reformer. He was probably just the first successful one, possibly the most successful one, and he's really the only one that got to live to a ripe old age without any negative consequences, okay? Earlier reformers like Jan Hus was tried and executed. John Wycliffe, he did die of a stroke, but the church was so ticked off with him, they dug up his body, cremated it, and dumped the ashes into the river. So the point is, again, it's about, there's a certain amount of timing that is important. And so Luther was fortunate in that he was born and active in a time when an information revolution was happening in Europe. And we see that today as we look over the last several years, as we see protests and revolutions in other parts of the world. Another obvious example is the Declaration of Independence in the U.S. Of course, it was a letter sent to a despot in the U.K. But the real power of this is that it was printed and posted throughout the colonies, right? And so it became not just a letter from one group of malcontents to one king. It became a piece of propaganda that ultimately led to the actual independence. And so when we think about these things, we think there's a lot of power in the information that we are producing. But one of the things that concerns me is when we look at these information, we can see how there's an evolution. There's a way that we got to the things that we see today. This book is the outcome, the form of this book is the outcome of hundreds of years of printing technology, of design and thinking, right? We can go back and we can look at other books. We can see the first book that had a table of contents, the first book that had page numbers. Here we can see in this example, user-facing, interface, and print. This is an example of how paragraphs developed, right? So paragraphs originally were indicated in manuscript with a line and then a space, indicating the change of thought. And then it changed when we got into Western civilization and printing. We would see these marks here. These were the predecessors to a pilcrow, the paragraph symbol that we're familiar with. And typically in these books, they were actually marked in red, which is the origin of the term rubric. And then eventually, after a little bit more time, what happened is that they would leave space for those rubrics to get filled in. Eventually, people said, you know what? What if we just don't fill in the rubrics? And now we have indented paragraphs. And so the point is we see an evolution. We can go back in time. We can see where things changed. And while I can look at documents that go back 500 years, it's very difficult for me to find things from just a few years ago when we talk about the digital age, right? We can look at art. It's very easy for us to see how things changed in art. We can find examples of Impressionism. We can see examples of Art Nouveau, Dada. We know what the differences are between these different art movements. And again, we can identify the major players in them. So this is a fake. Actually, it's not a fake. This actually is from Gopher. So I remember the first time I used the World Wide Web or the internet. It was in '95, September, maybe August. It was actually right over there in the library, about maybe 75 feet from where my office is today. But what was really interesting about it was completely text-based. Right. This was the internet. This was the internet at the time, and it was wonderful. There was nothing but information out there, ASCII art, that sort of things. I would usually spend most of my evenings before I got really busy with homework, looking up Beavis and Butthead jokes, David Letterman top 10 lists. You could find anything, right? It was great, and then things changed. And so what I've kind of been thinking about over the last several years is how things have changed online and how we know what good is online. Early on in the web, it was very common to see websites like this. And then first of all, I'll apologize for the poor quality of the pictures. I actually, in order to find these, what I did is I actually went back through a variety of design magazines. And so I had to take pictures of them because they don't exist anymore. So it's ironic. In order to talk about the past of digital, I have to go back to print and then turn that into digital. And so this is what we're looking at. And what's interesting to me about it is when we look at the web in those early days, they have this look, right? Light type on a black background. Why is it like that? Now, my hypothesis is because people were really just mimicking the look of a Linux terminal, maybe, but this is what a website was considered to look like in the late 90s. We also had these sorts of things. And by the way, we can laugh at these things, but at the time, these were award-winning websites. These were best practices, right? Tiled backgrounds. Does anybody do this anymore? But this was, again, this was a way of making your website. Frames, right? Todd talked about frames this morning, and I remember when frames really became a big thing. It was funny. I remember the first website I saw that used frames. And it was funny, like they had a headline, I thought, this website uses frames. Like, this is a feature. Like, you should be really excited about it. And then it explained, it means that you can have a navigation here and still scroll, and you can change, you can go to the next page, and the navigation will still be there. And it's funny, and again, these are award-winning sites. But what also is interesting is, early on in the web, we see a lot of experimentation. So you see here is a very interesting frame. It's kind of a proto-slider, right? And it's kind of trying to be a slider, and it's kind of faking it with the horizontal frame. I think it's interesting. And again, these are actually some excerpts from some books that can help you learn how to make good websites, right? Frames provide a great degree of flexibility, right? They're good stuff. Remember splash pages?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I did that, and it was kind of funny because there's a certain amount of BS. I worked at design firms at the time that these were popular. There's a certain amount of BS that you kind of give the client. It's like a magazine cover. It's it kind of is a buffer between search engine results with the last site, and it cleanses the palette, right? And it's kind of like, yeah, all right, we don't believe that anymore. But I mean, this is the American Institute of Graphic Arts, a design organization. That was a homepage for the Chicago chapter, and then this is OXO, obviously a well-known human-centered design company. And this is their homepage. And what's really interesting about this is it's kind of a splash page, but it's also mystery meat navigation, right? We don't know exactly what's in there. And then again, we poo-poo these things now, but at the time, this was good. This was the way you made a good website, right? Sometimes you just want to make a splash. So this happened. Remote navigation of pop-ups. I'll tell you right now, my very first website, I don't have a record of it. Because it was probably on floppy disk, and we can't do floppy disks anymore. But my very first website used a pop-up with a remote navigation. Because I said, oh, that's cool. I can click on a button on this window, and it'll affect that window. Which, in 1998, that was kind of cool, but whatever. But what's interesting about this is Levi's, again, these are award-winning websites. I think they've got like 18 pop-up windows for their site. I mean, can you imagine dealing with this? Now, again, what's interesting about this and why I kind of want to talk about this topic is because I think it's interesting because I think it shows a lot of innovation and a lot of culture and technology designers finding their way towards what a good experience was, and really pushing the limits of what is a good site. Mystery meat navigation, we saw this a lot early on, right? What do these numbers mean? I don't know. What does the faux periodic table mean over there? I don't know. Doesn't really tell us what we're looking at. Doesn't really tell us where we're going. Flash. This was really, for a while there in between 2001, 2003, 2005, Flash was a big deal, right? I mean, a huge deal. This was a site, again, award-winning one, completely done in Flash. This was one of my favorite sites around 2002, I think. Dennis Interactive, again, completely rendered in Flash, not a bit of HTML on it. And it also has the bonus of mystery meat navigation. You really don't know exactly where you're going. And the other thing that's really interesting about this, as we look at these old sites, is they're also really tiny and constrained, and they're of a fixed size, right? And that's another thing that we encountered early on. And so this is my best attempt at trying to sort this out, right? I'm trying to figure out, okay, what was the evolution of digital information? I'm trying. I mean, this is not perfect. It's, like I said, it's about what I've put together. And so I kind of said, well, maybe around 95, we'll say the World Wide Web started. It's probably late, it's probably earlier, but it's taking around. And we start thinking about what is the web and what are the technologies that enable the web experiences that we created, right? We started out in the mid-90s thinking of websites as advertising, right? I mean, one of my big projects when I first graduated and went to an advertising agency was making websites, and we treated websites as advertising. And then they developed a little bit more, and they became brochureware. But then there was also this other phenomenon, the EN sites, right? Does everybody remember EN sites, everything nothing sites?
Oh.
Yes, everything nothing sites, right? And everything nothing sites were a very weird thing where we'd have designers, artists, high school kids creating these self-expressive pieces of garbage. But what the thing, and some of them actually won Webby Awards. But that was a precursor to blogs, right? Which basically made websites and the ability to publish available to everybody. And then things kind of just keep going from there. And so now we're really almost at the point where, which I think is really interesting, where the web is ubiquitous. It's really hard to participate in society nowadays without access to the web, right? You can't sign up for benefits, you can't sign up for unemployment, you can't pay your bills. Well, I guess you could probably pay some bills, but it's really tough you can't apply for jobs, right, unless you have access to the web. And so we're all the way over here after roughly 22 years, where the web is a utility, it's ubiquitous. And now what's really interesting is we're starting to see the digital world is now starting to overflow in the physical world, right, through augmented reality, Internet of Things, 3D printing, these sorts of things. Like I said, this is just like a first draft. This is just my first attempt to try to sort out what the last couple of decades have looked like. And the funny thing is again, I started talking about this with people in 2009, and I wonder how much information, how much knowledge we've lost since then. This is the Kent State University website. Now what's interesting is, it is interesting to see the evolution of an individual experience. But again, the truth is, this does not give us insight into the ideas like, what was the first website to use frames? What was the first website to use a splash page? When did those innovations start? Again, I can identify the first time illustration was used in the printed book. I can identify the first time the first Dada artist, but we don't have that here. But what's interesting here is you can see the trends, right? This is the very first Kent State University website. It has a table of contents. Isn't that quaint? Right? And frequently asked questions, because you have to have those. It looks like there's two. But they're important. How do I know and where is it?
It's actually not that bad of a website for 1992 or what.
I'm not saying any of these are bad. I'm just saying this was the state of the art at the time. And then this one is really interesting. I think it was probably around the time Jacob Nielsen was getting a lot of attention, because this is clearly all influenced by him. A lot of blue links. And then this is the one, I guess it was probably around the 2006, 2009 period. I seem to remember seeing this when I was a student. But why is this important, and why is it that I think that it makes sense and is important for us to talk about these things? And the big thing is evolution isn't linear, right? We don't, technology and information in particular, especially when it's distributed among a number of people, is not a straight line, right? We make advances, and then we go backwards a little bit. And then we make another advance, but we go backwards a little bit, right? One of the benefits I had of working at Eaton for almost 11 years is, over 11 years, almost 12 years. I got to see that evolutionary process take place. And so this was Eaton.com as it launched in 2002. There were earlier versions, but this is what it looked like in 2002. And again, what do we see here? We see a couple of things. One is dark background, light text. We see flash bits in here, right? We also see things like form elements as navigation. That's something that happened. And then in 2007, we launched a newer version of Eaton.com. We got rid of this nasty dark background. We still have Flash, but it became even bigger, right? Because Flash was important, right? People want that. Still had form elements as navigation. I think the website may have actually gotten bigger, but maybe not. But the thing is, we could see that the website was going in a direction, right? It was going in a direction where we were talking about usability, we were talking about legibility, and these sorts of things. Now remember these dates, 2002, 2007. By now, we know, we have a pretty good idea of what a usable website or usable experience is. So during this time, I was working at Eaton. I was the manager of user experience. I also did some work with branding. And I also did some work with our branding group, and so we were concerned with colors and those kinds of things. And I one day had an IT developer come to me, and he had an idea, and he wanted to create an iPad app. I said, that sounds good. And he was actually very far down the road. And this is what he bought in 2011. And I said, well, and this is just the one screenshot that I was able to find from my archives, okay? Because I mean, I'm going to keep everything. And I said, well, that's nice, but, you know, we have the new Eaton.com that launched in 2007. There's actually another version that launched in between there. You know, we're kind of going with white backgrounds, that sort of thing. And you don't understand. You're talking about branding. I said, no, I'm not really talking about branding. I'm talking about legibility and readability, right? Because we know that, you know, just like books, just like websites, dark text on white backgrounds are generally more readable. No, you're not listening to me. This is what an iPad app is supposed to look like, right? It's supposed to have a dark background, right? This is what it is. Why? Like, have you tested this? Like, why would you? That was the same argument that you gave us 5 years ago, 10 years ago with websites. You're making a mistake. No. He got ticked off. He went to his boss. And his boss came back with an even better line of reasoning and said, you know, look, I get where you're coming from, but, you know, the dark background really helps the content to pop, right? Because, you know, like when you look at jewelry and how they shoot jewelry, it's always shot on a black background because it really helps the jewelry and the colors to really pop. If you put it on a white background, it's just not going to be. Okay, that's jewelry. This is a hydraulic pump. There's a very big difference. And by the way, this is supposed to talk about specifications. This is supposed to be readable. You're going to have tables and information. In 2016, maybe even earlier, this is what that app evolved into, right? It became, first of all, it was redone as an iPad app, and then eventually they ended up turning it into an online app. But again, it was this idea of, you know, this is clearly much more readable to people. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to this. And so what kind of makes me think about these things, I kind of ask myself, why do we keep making the same mistakes, right? Innovation is happening faster and faster, and yet we seem to forget what we've already learned. And I don't know what the answer is to that or what the solution is to that. Maybe I think about these things more than I should and more than other people. One of the resources I use a lot is Wayback Machine on archive.org. I like it because it's pretty good. I mean, it's better than nothing. And I guess that's what I would say about archive.org. But my critique of it is it's incomplete. right? If you have a website that's poorly constructed, has bad redirects, these sorts of things, you're not going to be able to see it on archive.org. And also it's incomplete in the sense that you don't get a sense for the design decisions, you don't see the context for which these websites were created, right? You don't get insight into it. It's just kind of like, here's a snapshot of time, maybe, of parts of the site. There's probably some images missing, and if there was a redirect or a bad script, you don't get to see that. Another one, like this history of the web, this is out there. It's interesting, but it's really kind of from one perspective. It's useful because it does talk about the evolution of the web, but it seems to me to be largely a talking about technology. So what I'm really interested in is the user experience, the user interface, and how that evolves, and how, again, we got to the place where we are today. And so what I'm suggesting or proposing here is this. This is what I'm calling the Digital Genome Project. I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but it's out there. So one day, a while back, I got the domain name Digital Genome Project, and I decided that I would put up a wiki that is collaborative, that people can add to, and the idea is to try to somehow reclaim the history and the rationale and the logic and try to understand how it is that we got to where we are today. It's interesting to me as well because when I was a student in the UXB program, then called IACRM program, we had resources at the time. One of them was IA Wiki. Who remembers IA Wiki? And it's gone. Okay, so there's two of us that remember IA Wiki. And it doesn't exist anymore, right? And it actually, I think it died fairly early when I became an instructor. But the point is, I think there's a real opportunity for us to have some kind of collaborative space where lots of people can share and add their perspectives on digital information, how things have evolved, think about the user interface elements that you've encountered, when they were used, why they were used, how they were used, and why they were good or bad. With that, I am on time. So, so that's pretty much the presentation. Like I said, I'm not sure that I've given you anything that you can use. Maybe I've given you something you can think about. If you have any questions or answers, I'm here. And with that, it's 3:50.
About the loss of information online, like we have so much stuff being put online, but like I like to watch the genealogy road shows and stuff, where am I from? How are people going to be able to research where their people come from in a digital way? I mean, all this stuff you go to the library and look up, what's going to happen now that everything's online? I just think it's really interesting.
Well, I think that's one of the ironies of the time that we live in is we are creating, I can't even tell you what the stats are, but I know it's ridiculous. I mean, I think it's something on the order of as much information as in the Library of Congress is created every day than there is, and yet we lose a lot of information. The other thing is a lot of the information is garbage, right? I mean, just because you have more information doesn't mean that you have more knowledge. It's another one of those ironies is, does access to more information actually make you smarter? If you'd asked me 15 years ago, I'd probably say yes. Now I'd probably say not necessarily, because there's just more noise for you to sort through. So, I think it's kind of one of the, I kind of feel like when we look at the digital age and digital information, we're kind of in an inflection point, right? We've gotten to where we are today. How's that going to go in the future, right? So, I don't know. Like I said, I don't have any answers. I just have questions. Yeah.
So within those three categories, you said design, content, what was the other one? Style.
Technology, content, and design/style. But, it's an organizing tool I've made.
Yeah. So there's probably like hundreds of facets, ways to categorize and these these things, and it's really only useful if it's categorized in a way that I can form relationships, right? So I can see like these are examples of this, and I don't know how would you think about like how to actually categorize or determine taxonomy for these kind of things?
Well, I mean, really, that's kind of the reason I wanted to do this talk, because for the last 8 years, I've been ruminating on this, off and on, and that's the best I could come up with in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like it's more important and more valuable to open that conversation up to more people. And I think you're right. There probably are there's certainly many more facets that we can use. Those are the three that I think Jason and I came up with, and over a drink somewhere, and that was about it. And that's all the further it went. But yeah, I think there's a lot more to this. But but it's not in my head.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be in kind of our collective memories. Oh, my time's up.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, thanks for coming, and we'll see you again.
This is awesome.
Oh, it's hilarious. I love it.
You too. It's good to see you.
Oh, let me pass. Really?
Yeah.
Right?
Why would you change it?
I know. It doesn't.
Sometimes Thursday or Friday. I was thinking it wasn't right because you were
Yeah,
yeah, because we were working on it in '98 when Google was
It
going
is.
public.
I like seeing too, like their categories.
Right,
Like,
I was
really
gonna
so,
What are the
very
categories?
useful. Animals. The world.
Okay.
There's a good heading. Everything.
Okay.
Miscellaneous.
I know. I have to take a picture of this because I'm like nerdy.
You Yeah, do you want
Yeah.
I love the idea of your paper, and I hope.
Thanks. Although within each category, there's no further subcategories. It's just alphabetical.
And that's my
So you have the British Dyslexia Association.
Right.
Because I'm going to be out since we're credits.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want these open.
We're gonna like this.
Nostalgia, like steal it from the library.
Okay. Well, we can talk Wednesday.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and then we'll
You want it?
down.
Yeah, or like prop it up on the
Yeah,
table.
and
Yeah,
also
yeah.
probably the location.
Got a picture of William
I
Shakespeare.
thought so.
No.
Do
Super
your
selfie.
Instagram.
Now, would you like the
Actually,
full,
we're in really good shape.
Stole
the full publishing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right,
Like
that's still.
2 weeks before, so.
Right?
Yeah,
You
and
need a
then I
picture of-
just got.
Actually, I want to take a picture of the table of contents.
Yeah.
I think that's hysterical. Just like what's important to society.
University.
Well, what's important to Helicon Publishing Limited?
What is the
Awesome.
internet is the first.
So last week.
Is